welcome back to the channel. Today's video we're going to be looking at Depressive Realism, which if you haven't heard of it before, I will break it down in a second. We're also going to have a look at some of the evidence for and some of the evidence against. I'm doing sort of the bare minimum for this because I have my own thoughts that I'm going to give on it to help lengthen the video out a bit more. So I've literally just searched Depressive Realism, and the first thing that comes up is the Wikipedia page. So that's what we're looking at. So the little breakdown that Wikipedia gives is that Depressive Realism is the hypothesis which was developed by Lauren Alloy and Lynn Yvonne Abramson, that depressed individuals make more realistic inferences than non-depressed individuals. Basically saying people who have depression actually have a much clearer view of reality, like a more clearly defined grip on reality, as opposed to people without it who actually have a positive bias. They're sort of looking through life with rose-colored glasses, essentially, which, if you think about it, is kind of cool. And certainly, forming beliefs while being depressed, if you end up forming lifelong beliefs, they're going to be more grounded in what's actually real. Okay. Although depressed individuals are thought to have a negative cognitive bias that results in recurrent negative automatic thoughts, maladaptive behaviors, and dysfunctional world beliefs, all of which is, let's be honest, kind of true. Depressive Realism argues not only that this negativity may reflect a more accurate appraisal of the world, but also that non-depressed individuals are positively biased, as I mentioned before. And the first bit that it comes up with is the evidence for. So let's look at that real quickly. When participants were asked to press a button and rate the control they perceived they had over whether or not a light turned on, depressed individuals made more accurate ratings of control, than non-depressed individuals. Among participants asked to complete a task and rate their performance without any feedback, depressed individuals made more accurate self-ratings than non-depressed individuals. For participants asked to complete a series of tasks, given feedback on their performance after each task, and who self-rated their overall performance after completing all tasks, depressed individuals were again more likely to give an accurate self-rating than non-depressed individuals. When asked to evaluate the performance both immediately and sometime after completing a task, depressed individuals made accurate appraisals both immediately before and after time had passed. In a functional MRI study of the brain, depressed individuals were shown to be more accurate in their causal attributions of positive and negative social events than non-depressed participants who demonstrated a positive bias. This difference was also reflected in the differential activation of the frontotemporal network, higher activation for non-self-serving attributions in non-depressed. I am hoping this makes sense to you, because to be honest, I'm just hearing words at the moment. I'm not even absorbing any of this. I'm going to start that sentence again. This difference was also reflected in the differential activation of the frontotemporal network, higher activation for non-self-serving attributions in non-depressed participants, and for self-serving attributions in depressed patients, and reduced coupling for the dorsomedial dorsomedial. That sounds better. Prefrontal cortex, seed region, and the limbic areas when depressed patients made self-serving attributions. A whole bunch of jargon there. Honestly, even after reading it the second time through, still don't entirely understand what's going on there. But depressed patients were shown to be more accurate. So we've got some evidence against, and this section's actually a little bit bigger than the other one, but the paragraphs therein are actually shorter. So let's have a look at the evidence against this particular theory. When asked to rate both the performance and the performance of others, non-depressed individuals demonstrated positive bias when rating themselves, but no bias when rating others. Depressed individuals universally showed no bias when rating themselves, but a positive bias when rating others. Which is interesting. Note that no one's really giving any negative biases. But you can obviously see that not having depression, you think you're doing better than you probably actually are. Whereas having depression, you're fully self-aware, but you just feel like everyone else is doing better than you are. Interesting. When assessing participant thoughts in public versus private settings, the thoughts of non-depressed individuals were more optimistic in public than private, while depressed individuals were less optimistic in public. Interesting. I mean, it doesn't give us any... it doesn't tell us that people thought the same thing about private. It's purely just looking at the public bits there. And it also doesn't show us whether or not the depressed individuals were more optimistic with the private than the public. So make of that what you will, really. The next bit says, when asked to rate their performance immediately after a task and after some time had passed, depressed individuals were more accurate when they rated themselves immediately after a task, but were more negative after time had passed. Whereas non-depressed individuals were positive immediately after and some time after. I think that the accuracy and then sort of waning into negativity on the depressed side is probably to do with overthinking. They've come in and been like, yeah, no, that was sort of here, and then as time's gone on, they're like, oh no, maybe I did worse at that than I thought. I know what that's like. I know exactly what that's like. So I don't know how that's evidence against this. It's just showing us that the curve of depression with overthinking, as opposed to having sort of a slightly inflated just plateau, being like, I did a 7 there, and then just stating that as fact thereafter, instead of being like, I did a 7 there, and then maybe it was a 5. I don't know. I don't understand how that's evidence against, but anyway. Although depressed individuals make accurate judgments about having no control in situations where they in fact have no control, this appraisal also carries over to situations where they do have control, suggesting that the depressed perspective is not more accurate overall. That's some good evidence against. But again, with depression, it's sort of a feeling like you don't have any sort of control, because the things that you're thinking like, oh, I need to have control over this, are sort of the really big pieces, and you're not so caught up with the fact that you do in fact have control over a light switch, You know what I mean? Like, that's not a huge life-changing event, turning on a light. At least not in developed nations. I'm sure it'd be a hell of an event in developing nations when they're finally able to just walk in and they have electricity. Perspective. But yeah, that's interesting. A testament to the illness itself, as far as like we know that that's one of the symptoms. But it's interesting that it carried over to situations where they did. And the last one here says, one study suggested that in real-world settings, depressed individuals are actually less accurate and more overconfident in their predictions than their non-depressed peers. Participants' attributional accuracy may also be more related to their overall attributional style rather than the presence and severity of their depressive symptoms, which again is just another area for discussion and for study. Do we need to get people that have varying severities and only look at them? Maybe bring in some people that don't have it, just so you can have that like control sort of a thing, of being like, well, this is what it looks like without depression, and then the different severities. Maybe the different severities should be rated against each other as well. Interesting. Now, obviously, there's some criticism as well, because obviously there are going to be people that are going to be for, there's going to be people that are against and don't think this is a thing, and that's entirely what this video is about, whether or not we think it is or not. I'm just going to quickly read this. It's only one little paragraph. Some have argued that the evidence is not more conclusive because no standard for reality exists, which is kind of hard to state, unless you know, I mean, you have to really put them into controlled environments to actually be able to be like, this is what's real, this is what's true, we know, because that's how it's been designed, you know what I mean? But yeah, we really can't define what is actually real. So some have argued that it's not conclusive, because no standard exists, the diagnosis is dubious, and the results may not apply to the real world. Because many studies rely on self-report of depressive symptoms and self-reports are known to be biased, the diagnosis of depression in these studies may not be valid, necessitating the use of other objective measures. Due to most of these studies using designs that do not necessarily approximate real-world phenomena, the external validity of the depressive realism hypothesis is unclear. There is also concern that the depressive realism effect is merely a byproduct of the depressed person being in a situation that agrees with their negative bias, which that alone is more compelling evidence against, it's certainly a compelling argument against the criticism of the evidence for sort of a thing. But yeah, me personally, I mean, again, biases, because I am clinically diagnosed. This isn't a self-diagnosis. I am clinically diagnosed. But even before I was, I've always sort of subscribed to this idea of depressive realism. I think it's really cool. But again, I could be biased because I have struggled mentally for quite a number of years. Never really fully gotten past it. Just when I think I'm getting out of the thick of it, something else just comes along and ruins my entire year. But you know, I've always thought that it's at the very least a cool idea, that the natural state of our brains is actually to see things in a more positive light, because obviously, when it comes down to it, your reality is different to my reality, which is different to, you know, someone else's reality. That's why, you know, like every story has two sides, sort of a thing. And those two sides generally are the perspectives and the biases of the person involved in the incident. You know, so yeah, it's definitely an interesting one to think about. And with that, I'm going to ask that in the comments below, you let me know whether you are for or against this idea. Do you think depressive realism exists? And why do you think that is? You know, if you think it does because you have, you know, you might not yourself, but you have a friend who has depression, and they seem to have a much, you know, clearer idea of what's actually going on, that could be your sort of first-hand evidence for, whereas that person themselves might think that they have no grip on reality whatsoever, as sort of like an exaggerated, they have no control over anything sort of an idea. So let me know in the comments below whether or not you think it's real or not. Polite conversation if we can. We're having a nice debate, and I want my channel to be a safe space for these sorts of discussions, because like I said, it's very interesting stuff. And while you're there typing along, might as well click that subscribe button and ring that notification bell as well, so you can be notified when I upload new videos. And if you liked this one, give it a big old thumbs up, and until next time guys, keep your head screwed on.